There are mysteries relating to the location and the nature of the wound in the president's back. There is a bullet hole in his jacket at the point of entry, more than 5 inches below the shoulder line. The president's shirt also has a bullet entrance hole at that point. His death certificate states, "A second wound occurred in the posterior back at about the level of the third thoracic vertebra." This, too, is a minimum of 5 inches below the shoulder line. This death certificate was signed by the president's personal physician, Dr. George Berkeley. Note that the entrance wound in the back is approximately 5 to 6 inches lower than the wound in the front of the throat. This diagram, made at the time of the autopsy, also shows the wound in the president's back approximately 5 to 6 inches below the shoulder line. This autopsy photograph of the president's back shows 2 artifacts that are possible points of entry. A hole is seen slightly above what appears to be a smaller wound, both of which are well below the president's neck and well into the back. Neither of these would correspond with the Warren Commission's version, which shows a bullet wound in the back of the president's neck 5 inches or more higher than the wound appears in the autopsy photographs. The higher of the 2 artifacts in the official autopsy photograph is what the House Assassinations Committee in 1979 said was the rear entrance wound on the president. The problem is that it's 4 times the size of a Mannlicher-Carcano entry wound. Indeed, it's 4 times the size of the wound that was measured and noted by the doctors during the autopsy. However, the lower artifact measures 4 by 7 millimeters, the exact size and position mentioned by Dr. Humes in the autopsy report. There is an abrasion collar or swelling around the lower artifact, which is indicative of an entrance wound. No such swelling is seen around the upper artifact. The House Assassinations Committee made the decision to suppress the autopsy photographs. Instead, they hired an artist named Ida Dox to draw medical illustrations based on those photographs. However, when Ms. Dox drew the picture of the president's back, the lower artifact was eliminated. All the House Committee published was the illustration showing the higher artifact, which is still far below the president's neck, but higher than the probable entrance wound, which is the lower of the 2. 15 years earlier, in 1964, the Warren Commission had also elected not to publish the autopsy photographs, choosing instead to hire a Navy medical illustrator, H.A. Rydberg, to draw medical illustrations of the alleged wounds to the president. 2 of the autopsists, Dr. James J. Humes and J. Thornton Boswell, told Mr. Rydberg that the rear entry wound was in the president's neck instead of his back. Mr. Rydberg was not allowed to view the autopsy photographs or the x-rays. He was told where to place the wounds. This amounted to what can be called verbal plastic surgery. In the Warren Commission's medical illustrations of the rear of President Kennedy, notice no wound is shown in the president's back, but has been placed in the back of his neck. Compare this now to the official autopsy photograph that purports to show the same wound. The wound was actually more than 5 inches lower than the point where the Warren Commission placed it in their illustration. Overlaying the 2 pictures, we see the degree of deception perpetrated by the Warren Commission and exactly how far up they moved the wound in the president's back to make the wound match the single bullet theory. Moving the alleged location of the wound upward from the president's back to the rear of his neck allows the description of a downward trajectory from the 6th floor of the book depository to pass through the president. With the wound 6 inches below the rear of the neck, as it actually was, you could not have an exit wound as high as the front of the president's throat. An exit wound from the depository would be approximately 10 to 12 inches down in the left side of the president's chest if the bullet had exited at all. According to one of the autopsists, Dr. Pierre Fink, he and the other 2 autopsists, all military personnel, were ordered by an admiral present in the autopsy room not to probe or track the wound in the president's back. Had a bullet heading downward from the 6th floor of the book depository, striking the president more than 5 inches below the shoulder line, simply could not have exited the front of his throat at a point approximately 5 inches higher than the point of entrance. It could not have happened.